satellites?
A satellite represents a journey, information gathering, this journey around the Earth.
Welcome to Satellite Haiku.
Yeah.
We were talking about reflections, like odd reflections. Like I have in this, so like as the sun goes down at this time of the summer, there's this city building downtown, like a really, like there's only like 3 quote unquote high rises in Tucson, downtown Tucson. Mm-hmm. But there's one that is angled just right. So it shines literally like as the sun's going down, it bounces off and hits like right into the house in this super, like right at like 5:15, you know, like it's like such a weird,
yeah.
It only happens.
There's a house across the street that's like that as the sun is setting. So we, coming through our east facing windows, which shouldn't catch the sun when it's setting, but it hits,
right.
We have neighbors across the street that have like these really glass face, facades that it just redirects the sun like boop into our house.
Totally.
And walking downtown in San Francisco sometimes is like that too. Like at different times of the day, you'll just be like, whoa, where's that heat coming from? It's like a heat lamp will hit you.
Yeah, totally.
And you're like, what? And then you realize it's coming from some window on some high rise. Yeah.
Yeah, that's impressive. Some of the...
you ever say like, fucking sun? And then kind of catch yourself like you want the sun to just die. And then you realize like that would actually be bad.
I remember when you moved to Tempe, I had been living in Tucson for a while, and I went through a period when I first got here I got here like August 20th, 1994 or something, and I remember like I lived maybe like a 5-minute ride from the university, and I remember going out in like the 110-degree noonday sun, and thinking, who would live like with these idiots? Like, why are they living? I was so angry that I'm one of them. But why did we move here? And then you once told me that you liked living here, but that the weather never commiserated with you. Like if you got up and you felt kind of dreary, the sun was like, no, we're not. You like came pounding. It was like blue sky, perfect. Whereas in Pennsylvania and New York, we always had like overcast days and kind of
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. It's Tucson. I always kind of, like you have people with like, well, the winters are nice. And then it's true. The problem is that it gets dark at 5:30 like winter everywhere else, right?
It's true.
Like, so you have these nice days that end at 5:30 p.m.
Yeah, no, it isn't. It's true. And the summer is like the problem with Tucson. And I've, as it started to get hot here, it's like 11 degrees hotter today than it is normally, right? Today. So that's like, it's going to be like 112. And yes, we have air conditioning. I get up in the morning, it's fine. It's like 75. But I started to get really grumpy. And I thought, oh shit, like it's right at the beginning. Like I'm grumpy already. Like usually I'm grumpy October 12th.
It's only June. But you're getting unseasonably hot. Like usually it's not this hot in June quite yet.
It's true. And actually next week for 11 days, it's going to be in the low 90s, which is perfect.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's nice.
That's awesome. I don't know. But then there's some kind of heat thing over the southeast of the U.S. That's Tucson. And it's like this.
Oh, like a heat dome or a heat bubble or whatever.
It said it's
going to
be like humidity at levels and heat levels like a tropical rainforest.
Gross.
That's brutal.
Did you read Ministry of the Future, the Kim Stanley Robinson book?
I have not.
Have you ever read him?
I have not. No, I haven't read him. No.
So he's a sci-fi author, and
the future.
Yeah. So he kind of writes these sort of utopia, and it's hard to describe like his general theme, but like this one is about climate change, and he decides to it's sort of based on the question: what if every possible thing went right, or what's like everything that could go right went right, or whatever, something like that. Basically, like what if we just sort of figured this shit out by the skin of our teeth? But the book opens with this very dramatic heat wave in, I think, India. But it basically talks about the wet bulb temperature. You know what that is?
No.
The wet bulb temperature is when temperature and humidity reach they reach a point where you can't cool your body can't cool itself. Like it's above, the heat and humidity are above basically survival temperature. Your body sweat can't deal with it at that point.
You're like in a steam room. You're like in a sauna, and you can't hit
exactly. And so He's just saying like, so it's based on like this heat wave happens and it kind of exceeds wet bulb temperature. So I think it's named after some instrument that people use to measure the temperature. And so like, militaries, soldiers will use it in rainforest situations, things like that, where they have to kind of cool off or die. But yeah, like millions of people die in this heat wave. That's kind of how the novel opens. And then so the world basically, tries to respond because it's the biggest sort of single climate change related mass death, in human history. Basically, it's millions of people all in one day, basically, or all in one 2-day period. And then so that kicks off the book, and it kind of waffles between what governments are doing, and then there's this sort of like the secret terrorist organization is pretty interesting because they do these things like they infect like a whole bunch of the world's cattle with mad cow disease to the point where people are just afraid to eat beef, and that kind of just completely just destroys the entire beef industry. Like you never know whether your beef is going to be tainted. They managed to using drones. I think they managed to shoot a number of private jets out of the sky, like these sort of bigwig corporate jets, and then people just stop flying because they're like, my jet might be next. So they just do these like targeted industry-related terrorist kind of acts. It's not a big part of the book. It's not a big part of why, but it's kind of interesting that he weaves this in, like, in order for humanity to kind of muster the will to fight climate change, to address it, there has to be a certain kind of fear element, probably, and that's kind of his premise, right? So there is a little bit of this current of, a couple different industries are completely destroyed by this sort of secret terrorist organization. It's a pretty good book.
Our podcast might be flagged by AI, like by the NSA, for me saying this, but I'm actually so shocked that more planes aren't taken down by like shoulder-fired rockets. Like it just seems so, like they're just, if you ever look at like a map of all the flights that are taking off all the time, like there's thousands of flights like all around the world, everywhere. And it just seems like in places where there's conflict, like, I don't know, Sudan or something, like you think it would happen more often that like someone would take one down like that, like the Russians shot down that Indonesian airliner. You think that would happen more often.
Just as a terrorist act.
Yeah, like it doesn't seem like there's any way to really protect against it,
Yeah, that's scary.
Just because you can get close enough to any airport.
I used to think this is a sort of a strangely similar thought, but it's not kind of political. But in New York, I just remember sort of feeling like it's kind of weird that we all live in this one place and you don't just have people just randomly punch you in the face as you walk down the street. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like that doesn't happen on a regular basis, that somebody just decides to just randomly punch somebody in the face. Because, and so I guess my thought is like, these things sort of prove that mostly we're good people. Like most people don't really want to cause mayhem.
Yeah, that's a great question as to why. You see those kind of clips where someone will come, especially like we saw them during like the COVID when people went a little crazy. And
there was the
like
anti-Asian hate, and there was like didn't Rick Moranis get punched in the face or something randomly in New York? Was it Rick Moranis?
I can't remember.
It was some celebrity that just randomly got punched in the face. It does happen.
Yeah, but it's like you'd think it would happen a lot more.
It's so rare.
Yeah. I also
like if you just kind of think, well, I bet 1% of people are psychopaths and they just want to cause mayhem. Like it seems like it must be less than that, because as you're walking through, I don't know.
Well, no. Like
those people become CEOs instead of punching people in the face.
To your point, one thing that I sort of, if you had came to me and said, like Fall of Rome 2, like what are the things that what are the sort of dumb choices we might make that would, and it occurred to me, like in Texas and Florida, like you have stand your ground, and then the Supreme Court said states aren't allowed to regulate gun ownership or like carry.
Yeah.
So you have open carry meets stand your ground, two guys in a Walmart parking lot fighting over a space, like you would think that there would be like 9,000 deaths. But
in those places.
How did that not occur? Like I would have predicted that there would be like this spike in 100%. Those. And so people must not be as interested in using their gun as I thought,
Like, I mean, it happens in America way more than anywhere else, but you're right. You would think it would happen like 100 times a day.
Yeah. And like when the Supreme Court, shot down New York's being able to say no one can carry a gun in the city or bring a gun to the city. Like you can't fly into New York with a gun. You used to not be able to. And they knocked down that law. And I was like, oh shit, like it's so densely populated. There's going to be like people just walking around with guns shooting each other everywhere. And it didn't, so far, hasn't really happened.
That's true. Yeah. I remember the first time after moving to Arizona seeing open carry. Concealed carry, I guess, is more controversial. But open carry to me was really dramatically kind of alarming, right? Like I moved from New York where I'd never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
And I remember the first day I saw it in Changing Hands bookstore and I was sitting there and a customer walked in and he just had two guns like just on his hips, and I was just like, holy shit.
And you know what I thought was really,
like it shocked me. I was so stunned by it.
I felt the same way when I got here too. And I remember thinking this was an odd logical thing. So that you had to get a permit to conceal carry.
Yeah.
But anyone could open carry in Arizona. And it seemed more like provocative to have guns on your hips than like in your pocket. It just seemed to me like odd.
But then when you think about it, it does make more sense. Like it is, because right, like concealed carry is scarier because you don't know who's packing, right? Like people could just...
Right, but there is something provocative about walking...
Oh, it's definitely more provocative.
And I know that, I remember looking up the rules, like I remember you're not allowed to walk into a bank.
And they want it to be provocative, I think.
You're not allowed to walk into a bank open carry.
Yeah.
Or banks can have a sign on the door that says no weapons.
Certain kinds of businesses can have
rules. Bars have a weird rule where unless the bar presents this large sign on the door that says no guns, the law is I can open carry in a bar, but I cannot have a drop of alcohol. As soon as
if you're carrying a gun.
If you're carrying a gun in a bar in Arizona, if you have
a drop of alcohol, it's illegal. But then if you're concealed carry, like nobody's going to know.
Right,
seems weird.
And I actually don't know what the law is because you get a permit from the sheriff or something to conceal carry.
I don't know why I just thought of this, but did you see that guy? It was a clip that went viral a little bit. It was like a podcast. It was two dudes, and like sort of rap guys, I think, rap artists. I don't remember. I have to find it. But one guy, his gun goes off in his pants and shoots himself in the leg, like during their podcast conversation with each other.
I'm sorry to laugh, but yeah,
no, it's really funny, and the reactions to it are really funny. I mean, it shouldn't be funny, but like his reaction to it, and then the host of the podcast, his reaction. They're just, first of all, there's like they barely react. Like, oh, who's shooting? Like. Right? Like, I'll have to find it because it's just, I watch it like 100 times because you just kind of, there's so many little pieces of it that are, anyway. I read a thing in kind of going to your open carry, or your stand your ground and the concealed carry, open carry, all that, the stand your ground in particular. I read this amazing piece on Substack the other day. It was a woman talking about trying to get a job at Walmart. Or she gets a job at Walmart, and she's just describing the training, and that it's just like it's so dystopian. But she's talking about how like part of their training was like, what if there is a shooter event, right? Like a shooter comes into the store, a mass shooter type thing, and what do we do, right? Like, and this is in Texas, I think, or Florida, one of those two states, and so. As they're doing this safety briefing on like an open, what do they call it? A shooter, whatever, active shooter. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
As they're doing the safety briefing, she laughs, like she sort of snorts laugh. She kind of can't stop, and they're like, it was a totally inappropriate laugh, and it just sort of freezes the training. And the trainer's like, what are you laughing at? And she's just like, she's like, if there was a shooter here and you yelled shooter. We're in Florida or Texas or wherever they were. She goes, the thing that would happen is 200 people around the store would pull out their guns because they're all like salivating for the opportunity to shoot somebody.
Terrible.
Right.
Yeah,
So now we would have 200 shooters in the store.
Yeah, and the one thing I feel like people who are like, good guy with a gun, is so dangerous, because if you shoot at the shooter and there's like 29 people behind him, you're gonna miss and you're gonna hit those people, and it's like you're now the shooter.
Totally. They're already, or when the police show up, everybody's holding a gun at that point.
Yeah, you don't know who's
Yeah.
So do you remember? I think it was the late '90s, but we could look it up. It was this on the East Coast in sort of Maryland area, maybe up and down the East Coast, kind of Eastern Seaboard. There was a series of attacks by a sniper, and he was a golfer.
The
and
DC sniper,
Yeah, he's super scary, right? And it turned out to be like a former sniper dude with his son who would just kind of went crazy. Anyway, so that was going on, and no one had caught him yet. And I walked into a Walmart. It was a fairly new store. It was back, now Walmarts have like really high shelves, but this was back when they had like low glass cases, like kind of like the front of a Target or something. And I used to buy, for my art paintings, I used to buy muslin, like cloth, like cotton cloth. So I was going in there, there's like some dude buying muslin, and this guy, how they have like a gun section. This guy picked up a sniper rifle with like a giant scope, and he was at the back, and he was looking through it, and then he just turned and swung it across the store, and everyone fucking was like, down, everybody get the store employees were like screaming. We all hit the deck, and we were like crawling around on the floor, and they like tackled him and they grabbed, because it was like everyone was on high alert of like,
right.
But he swung the fucking gun like across the store like this.
Yeah.
Oh man.
My dad owned guns, and I used to shoot guns quite a bit. And I will say, like, I kind of enjoy shooting, and there is a part of me that's like, if money was no object, if like, there's people that own 200 guns, and these things are $1,000 each or whatever. It's kind of insane what people with that serious gun fetish that they have. But I feel like if money was no object, and maybe if I didn't have kids in the house, I'd probably own a gun. I'd go and get a handgun or something, and I'd practice. I used to enjoy it.
Yeah. And
I will say that I don't know, like the gun control thing is so crazy, because I feel like I wouldn't be in favor of banning guns entirely. I'd be willing to have guns entirely banned. Like, I don't care about them that much, but like if I was advocating for policy, that wouldn't be the policy I would I would advocate for.
I mean, for me, I think like one of the sort of the easiest. I was talking to this guy who was at a Democratic rally in South, in Green Valley, and there's this kind of quirky dude who comes to them, and he's a gun advocate, and I remember it was after Uvalde, and I remember saying to him, I was like, I feel like the easiest, lowest hanging fruit that we missed in that last bill was simply making it so that you had to be 21, because wouldn't like everyone over 21 would be willing to throw those people under the bus?
There's a lot of sensible gun control, like age limits, background checks, all that stuff, right?
And at that point, so many of the school shootings have been committed by someone under the age of 21 who was allowed to legally buy a gun.
Who bought their own gun.
Who bought their own AR-15. Right?
Like once in a while, it's somebody who uses a gun that was in the house that was owned by their dad.
Parents.
But a lot of times, you're right. It's just some kid that went to a store and bought a gun.
Parkland.
Yeah.
All of these people, they legally bought a gun under the age of 21. And so I was like, just statistically, couldn't you get every single senator and congressperson to say, you got to be 21 to buy an AR-15? Like, that sounds so easy.
Yeah, they're all willing to do it. It's just like we have one very powerful group that lobbies them, and they feel it's a big enough threat that they won't do it.
And here's another weird thing about that, because I looked up, so first of all, the number one recipient, so the amount of actual cash coming out of the NRA to bribe these guys is not that much. They don't have that much compared to other special. And like the number one person who over their career has received the most from the NRA, which is like $13 million, was Mitt Romney. Like, he doesn't even seem to me like I don't know. To me, it sounds like we could buy off, You could
You'd
use
think.
the same amount of money.
I think maybe it's a matter of priorities because, like, I don't know. I got in a little bit of an online comment back and forth with, as I do, with Andrew Sullivan, the journalist or the writer pundit.
Oh, okay,
so-
yeah. I was thinking the guy from our town. Yeah, no.
Not Andy Sullivan that we know, but Andrew Sullivan, the British kind of journalist. I don't know what you call him, pundit, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I get into it with him in the comments a lot, and he's always engages with me.
Interesting. And what kind of a comment section? Was it a post that he wrote? Or?
Yeah, so he writes these things. Like he's an interesting guy because I would say he's politically moderate, probably like slightly conservative leaning, but he's very anti-MAGA, yeah. So I appreciate that perspective. I disagree with him on a lot of things, and then I really agree with him on certain things. And it's interesting because I think he's been kind of courageously. Oh, I don't know. Courageous is probably overstating it, but he's been being kind of a really good, strong voice of reason about Israel, the Israel-Gaza thing. There's a couple issues where he's really, like, he's got these blind spots. And Sam Harris is another one who has very similar blind spots about, like, wokeism, trans issues. Like, they're almost religiously... I mean, so, like, when I say blind spots, I mean they post a lot of stuff that's just a little bit misinformation or hysterical, right? That's not well argued. And so I kind of will get into it a little bit on some of these things. Well, he was talking about immigration, and he was talking about, what he thought the Democrats should do, or what position the Democrats should take on immigration, kind of in the face of these raids and stuff, which are really unpopular, raids on normal working people. And he was kind of unhappy with the rhetoric from Gavin Newsom and other people, and he was kind of making his recommendation, which I thought was just a stupid recommendation. I won't get into the details, but I was talking about, so in my little back and forth, I was talking about the polling and how, like, if you look at polling, like, most Americans want sensible immigration reform. Most Americans want some sort of legalization, path to being legal. I won't say path to citizenship because that varies when people use the word citizen, but path to legal worker status, or some path for people who have been here, especially people who have been here a while, people who are working, people who are non-criminals. They just want, like, good background checks, good, vetting, and that's what most Americans want, right? And when I say priorities, like with the gun control thing, like the ones who don't want that, like, so the ones who do want that, it's like their number 8 issue or their number 15 priority. Like, and the same, I would say it's probably the same with gun control. But the people who are anti-immigrant, it's like their most vitriolic, passionate, hostile, like it's the thing that energizes them beyond all reason, beyond anything else, right? So, like, even though, let's say 70% of Americans want sensible immigration reform, the 20% who really don't, like, it's their number one thing. And it's the other side of it is nobody's number one thing. And I would probably the same with gun control. Like, it's a really small group of people that are really into guns, but it's like their number one passion versus all the huge majority that want sensible gun reform. It's like their number 15 priority.
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
That's the thought. So I was just thinking, like, how do you combat that? I'm not really sure. But I think you're right. Like, that majority, somehow you have to, if you could figure out how to tap into that majority and make them focus on that thing as if it was their number one priority, even for one election cycle, you could probably solve that problem.
It's true. And, like, one thing that, so that's a really good point. And I wonder how to do, what it would take to change that, you know what I mean? And also, one of the things that happened after Uvalde is I remember thinking, wouldn't it be the obvious thing for law enforcement to request that AR-15s be banned on the streets by citizens.
Well, it used to be like a really strong consensus amongst law enforcement that like gun control used to be, that was one of the most reliable supporters of gun control was law enforcement.
Yeah, like
the fraternal order of police, the police unions, all of that, the sheriffs, whatever, the different or activist organizations that were, full of law enforcement folks. They were all pro gun control, anti-assault rifle, all that. They were instrumental in passing assault rifle bans. And it's much less consistent that way now because I think law enforcement is much more filled with far-right crazy people than it used to be.
Is that true? So after Uvalde, I remember hearing these guys were standing way back down the hall, and they said, we can't rush him because his AR-15 will pierce our body armor.
Yeah.
And I was like, if you were a cop, wouldn't you not want someone who's not a cop or a soldier to have a battlefield weapon?
There's so many things wrong with that, but yes, that is one of the things that's wrong with that, is that guy shouldn't have a weapon that's capable of piercing their body armor. Yeah. It shouldn't be possible for him to buy that weapon.
Yeah. This is another kind of...
It should also be like those guys should be shamed to the rest of their lives for not being willing to put their lives on the line as they are sworn to do.
Right. And I can't believe that there's not some robotic dog who with a flashbang grenade or some here's my thing is like, okay,
there's a whole bunch of them. There's one shooter, they might get hurt. One of them might get killed. Like, that's their fucking job.
Yeah, that's true. To protect little kids, to stop them from killing kids.
That's their job.
Yeah.
That's their main job.
Yeah. Like, you have one job.
That's it's risky. You signed up for that.
I'm going to put in the show notes.
I don't know.
I'm going to put in the show notes a link to a Noel and Owen Rhodes song called One Job. Okay. And it's so funny, and he doesn't specifically indicate what he's talking about, but I always imagine he's just singing to Merrick Garland. Like, I just imagine he's
my God.
He's going like this to Merrick Garland. You had one job, and think
about how the world would be different potentially. How the world could be really different right now if Merrick Garland and Jack Smith had fucking done their job. Like, if they'd been aggressive. And I feel a little bit, it's like the worst I told you so ever, but I remember every time I would encounter somebody when Trump was being indicted for this or that, and these charges were flying, 5 years ago or whatever. And people would be like, oh, finally we're going to get him. And I would always just say, no, we're not. Yeah. We're not. Like, it has never happened, and it won't happen. And there's nothing that's going to make me believe that he's ever going to face any accountability. So I didn't think he would be elected president again, but I also didn't think he would ever go to jail.
Yeah, it is kind of an odd, like, looking back and thinking the guy has some superpower, which is like, he's just Teflon Don. Like, he literally, nothing sticks to the guy. It's pretty
well,
impressive.
It's not only that, he's actually pretty savvy about his legal defense strategies. Like, he's really, really good at milking the timeline.
Yeah,
and
Roy Cohn taught him that.
Working the clock. And, that was what I was thinking of at the time, is that, like, it's not that he evades the accusations. They're like, because people used to say that about Bill Clinton. Like, I think that a lot of people would even admit that he's done all this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I think even MAGA people are like, they kind of like that he has done all, like, they don't defend whether he's done these things in a lot of cases. They just kind of like it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it doesn't really slide off him in that way, the same way as Clinton and other people. It's just like, I don't know exactly what it is. He's a cult leader, and that's part of it.
Have you seen, sometimes when you watch him speak extemporaneously, and I'm just kind of tracking the sort of what appears to be rapid neurological decline.
Yeah.
Like, he really does sound like a guy.
If you read his actual words, like if somebody else reads his actual words,
yeah,
he sounds like a complete ignoramus.
Or like a guy that got
his brain doesn't work.
A visitor, like a visitor pass to leave the memory section of an elderly care ward. Like it almost seems like that, and you're like, oh my God, like he's allowed to say, let's go to war. Is he allowed to say that? I thought Congress had to authorize a war.
Well, I mean, I think Congress has to declare war, and there's certain things there's certain kinds of actions that are, that require congressional authorization. But there have been many, many cases where presidents have acted unilaterally, and they've kind of like pointed to this or that loophole why it's not war, right? They call it something else. They use weird sort of rhetorical tricks to make it not war and not something that requires Congress. I mean, Obama did it. George W. Bush did it.
Bill Clinton attacked the
Clinton did
Serbs.
Yeah, so they all have done it.
And didn't we wasn't technically the Vietnam War, it was the Vietnam conflict. So it technically wasn't a war.
Yeah, I don't know, but
at
least it wasn't for a long time. Yeah, I don't know if it ever became a war, but for a long time it wasn't. You're right.
But that's an interesting, and Bill Clinton, he finally sent F-16s in to attack Serbia. In fact, they pulled planes from the Tucson boneyard, F-16s, because the newer ones weren't lasting as long. They were falling apart faster. So they wiped off the titanium dioxide and they threw them back up to attack the Serbs. I remember that.
Did you hear this? Speaking of this, so I'm going to connect this back to, I'm going to weave this back to a Trump thing really quickly. But did you hear, there was a thing about the F-35 and the engines and how he said, I heard this clip from a congresswoman asking, like a Democratic congresswoman asking one of these, like, defense, Pete Hegseth or some dumbass, one of them, a question a couple weeks ago about, I guess Trump had looked at the F-35 plans and was like, this could be better with 2 engines. And like it kicked off this entire like inquiry, like, oh yeah, we should evaluate what it would take to put 2 engines on. Like this F-35 has been a project for, I don't know, 2 decades now.
It's like $1 trillion plane. Yeah.
It's ridiculous, right? It's already ridiculous. And so the congresswoman, whoever she was talking to, she was like, or maybe it was a congressman, but they were saying to I'll have to find the clip, but the clip I saw, the soundbite was him saying to the guy testifying, it's okay to just tell the boss no sometimes. Like it's okay to just say that's a bad idea or that ship has already sailed. Like you can just say no. We don't have to do a whole evaluation just because the boss asked a question. You can just say no sometimes. So apparently, there was this whole like inquiry, like what would it take and how much would it cost and what would it do to the plane? And oh my God.
Wow. And that plane isn't it
because
the most
Trump
expensive?
was like, what if it had 2 engines?
What about when he saw the stealth bomber and he said, they said it was invisible. That thing's not invisible. We're gonna have to fix that because that thing, I can see that
one
thing. You
dumbass
can you see that
thing after. Yeah, my mom, who voted for Trump, sadly, after his West Point,
didn't she voted for RFK? She wanted
RFK, and somehow that convinced her to vote for Trump. I think Charles Eisenberg. Do you know that guy?
No.
So Charles Eisenberg is one of these sort of like quote unquote heterodox writers that I used to follow, and he's kind of an interesting guy. But he started working for RFK's campaign, and he became like just a weird lunatic kind of apologist for the dumbest shit. Like I won't say apologist for RFK and Trump, which he was to a certain extent, but like after he got a lot of blowback for just posting some really dumb shit, his latest posture has been kind of like, hey, partisanship is the problem, right? Like you guys are against me because of partisanship, right? Not because I said stupid shit. Anyway, so I think Charles Eisenberg was also instrumental in convincing my mom because he's really he's really smart dude. Mm-hmm. Like he writes things that seem well argued on the surface until you just like peel off one layer and then it's just like, that is so fucking stupid. Anyway, so
I sometimes feel that way about Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
Like I feel like he's a very intelligent, articulate, well-spoken guy, but every once in a while when he justifies something that the Trump administration has done, I'm like, Do you remember that memorable relation in Emanuel Swedenborg where he's talking about the love of falsity? And
No.
he's talking about a person that he meets in the spiritual world who can convince you with logic that a black crow is white.
Oh.
And that it's so stupid because he's so good at doing it, but there's no point other than just he loves falsity.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like motivated reasoning. Some people are so good at reasoning that when they are motivated to make a certain point, their mind can craft the reasoning around whatever they're trying to make. And so that motivated reasoning is so powerful and so hard to kind of like do anything with because it comes from this deep motivation, right? Like you need to believe something about whatever. My cousin, Amanda Ripley, she's a journalist. She's written a few books, and she's pretty well known, pretty successful. Writes for a lot of different outlets, The Atlantic and other places. But she did a recent thing on Substack, a little Substack Live. Her latest kind of book is about conflict between like family members and disagreements and how to resolve conflict. I forget what good conflict or something. She has a new book. I'll put it in the show notes. But and she has a whole like nonprofit that she's helped establish around this idea of like resolving conflicts and arguments around issues that we feel really strongly about and how to talk to people. And she did a live yesterday or the day before on Substack with a couple people, where she tried to coach this woman through another woman. A woman was on this podcast, and she had a disagreement with her friend about Israel, Gaza, and this guy Mamnandi in New York with the mayoral candidate.
Oh yeah.
Can't remember his name, but anyway, I guess her friend who's Israeli was like, she had a big falling out with her friend, and so Amanda was kind of trying to coach her through. But yeah, it's just that motivated reasoning thing. It's, people are really good at logic, and logic can get you from point A to point B, where point B is completely false, but you've tied the threads together well enough through logic that it's hard to unravel, hard to untangle.
I have a weave back to. So I heard right before that we went on, I heard that the Trump administration is decommissioning the option on the, what's the line you call for suicide prevention?
LGBTQ suicide.
Yeah. What's the number though you dial?
The hotline or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But like you dial 911 and then you're.
I don't know what the actual number is.
Well, we're going to put it in the show notes because.
Okay.
And if you're experiencing any kind of feelings of suicidal ideation, please call the number in the show notes. But they're going to decommission, and ironically, it was a bipartisan vote to put it together, and Trump signed it, like back in his first term. But he's decommissioning it, I think, just to be cruel.
Well, it's just part of this whole anti-DEI thing that he's doing, yeah.
Right. So here's an interesting thing. When we were I
don't think he's doing anything. I think he has a bunch of people that are really into this stuff that are part of his administration now that weren't back then. But anyway.
So two giant, sort of elephant in the room topics that I see people doing this motivated reasoning thing. Like, for instance, let's say Bill Mayer talking about how he's annoyed about pronouns, right?
Yeah.
And then people who are Israeli who are want to somehow justify the killing of children in Gaza. So my thing is when you jump to the elephant in the room for me is when you jump to I'm annoyed about pronouns. And how many people are now declaring themselves non-binary. You skip over a fact that so many transgender people are A, murdered by others, or B, commit suicide because they don't fit in. That's this huge lack of empathy to just be it annoys me to use pronouns. But one reason we do is because, and the same thing is true of Gaza, right? You have to jump over this huge elephant in the room of children, 32,000 children have been murdered.
Right.
But I want to feel safe in Israel, and
that's what motivated reasoning does. It's very cherry picking, right? I'm going to cherry pick the few things that support my point. I'm going to ignore everything else. I'm going to hammer on those. Right. I'm going to ignore a huge amount of other stuff. I'm going to hammer on the few things that support my point. Yeah, I'm going to tie those things together. Yeah.
And to me, that's in order to run around a massive amount of dead people to get to your point. It seems like, wow, how did we get, that's what to me is shocking. How did we get to a place where we're so callous that we can easily just dodge a giant pile of dead people? Have you ever seen Bardo?
What is it?
It's the Mexican director it's really hard for me to say his name, Iñárritu.
Okay.
And he did he's most famous for The Revenant and Birdman. And he just made his it's kind of like his personal, it's hard to describe it. It's like a biopic, very dreamy, very bizarre. It's worth seeing. It's kind of framed in that same kind of like Jacob's Ladder, where like some dude that's dying, but we get the whole film is his flash before his eyes before he dies. I kind of ruined the film for you, but the ending. but there's
we'll put a spoiler alert in the.
There's a point where he, as a guy who grew up in Mexico City, and when I had just gone down there, let's say like 2 years ago, and went to the archaeological, the dig at Montezuma's castle, and we talked about the amount of skulls that are like using skulls as bricks in just the pile. So he has a scene where there's this pile of skeleton bones in a square, and he has to like climb to the top of it. And what's horrifying is like, is that like it seems sort of like, oh, he's exaggerating, but actually not. Like it's actually the amount of genocide committed by like the Aztec, lineage during that period was like a pile of bones that had to like a mountain of bones, And so he kind of creates with 3D, imagery and stuff. He creates this pile of bones. I don't exactly know how they did it, but to me it's the same thing. It's like how do you run around the pile of bones to do the motivated reasoning? It's really hard to understand.
Well, that's the power of motivation, right? I think it's a couple things. One is just motivation makes us blind. You're literally blind to certain things when you're highly motivated. To when you have an ideology that's highly motivating to you, you're just literally blind to stuff. It's not that you're even avoiding it. You literally don't see the other stuff. In a lot of cases, like it's almost like you have a psychic immune system, and there's some pre-processing that just gets rid of stuff before you even notice it's there, right? So that's part of it. Is the motivated part of motivated reasoning just makes you blind.
Do you think that it has something to do with that? Amusing ourselves to death. That concept of like being desensitized because you hear news that's irrelevant to your like your social graph. Like it's that idea that hearing about a serial killer in Austin,
like the filter bubble that we talk about.
Yeah, like you hear much.
Everybody
news,
lives in a filter bubble.
or also just like you hear so much news that is irrelevant. Like a serial killer in Austin has nothing to do with.
Like you have to actively filter all the time because otherwise that's a survival.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Kind of.
I guess. Yeah, I think that maybe we
just to kind of cope and function, you have to actively filter out so much all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be part of it. It probably exacerbates it. I don't think it comes from that. I don't think it's a cause.
Yeah.
Because I think it predates. I would suspect that that motivated reasoning kind of predates the media to some extent. I think media, the nature of media, of mass media, makes it easier to enable motivated reasoning, for sure, because you can go find whatever facts you want to support your thing, and not only go find those facts, but you're right, like you filter your experience of reality. Digital reality is filtered for you already, to some extent, to reinforce whatever your beliefs are. Yeah, but I don't know if I would. I don't think I would point to that as a cause. I guess I always wonder. Like I don't know what causes. I feel like I often come back to this feeling I have that there's just different kinds of people. It almost feels like it almost feels like so innate and fundamental, and almost like a biological difference, a physiological difference between people who are drawn to certainty, that need answers, that and maybe we're all like that on certain things, because I think of like Sam Harris, who I think of as a pretty rigorous thinker about a lot of things. But then there's a couple things where his beliefs are so strong, like he has such really strong beliefs about wokeism and about Israel, Gaza, that are tied into his beliefs about atheism and God and religion and all that. I don't know.
So is he an atheist or is he a religious person?
Yeah, he got really famous for being one of these new, quote, new atheists, right? He and Richard Dawkins and Hitchens, right? They used to do these tours. I think there were a couple other people in that little circle. But yeah, you can find online tons of events where Sam Harris was debating some religious person, like Sam Harris debating, some bishop or some evangelical or whatever about whether religion, and Jordan Peterson is one. He's a maddening debater on this subject. But yeah, because Sam Harris was on this very kind of a crusade. That's a weird word to use for it, it's for somebody who's an atheist. But he was on this kind of campaign, I'll just use a neutral word, to basically convince people that religion was doing a lot, has done a lot more harm than good in the world. And he's really compelling on this topic. But, he has a tendency to basically tag any kind of, like he looks at the Palestine Israel conflict, right? And he will just paint Palestine as jihad, right? Like all of it is jihad to him because it's a Muslim country. And so it can only, in his mind, its only motivation is jihad. And so he doesn't have any nuance at all around like the Palestinian people versus their, Hamas. It's all, he just lumps it all into one bucket because he feels so strongly about this sort of anti-religious extremism thing that if he sniffs one molecule of it somewhere, that is. So, and also he's Jewish. So I think there's probably some sort of Zionist side of him a little bit that maybe he's sympathetic to. But that's, like Zionism and Judaism are one and the same in a way, in the way he speaks. I don't know if if you called him out on that and say, do you think there's a difference between Zionism? Do you think, any critique of Israel is anti-Semitic? He might then provide some nuance, but without being asked that directly, he does seem to sort of make it seem like he thinks any critique of Israel policy is anti-Semitic by definition. So it's like those are weird blind spots that he has. And I think, I guess my point was that even somebody who's a rigorous thinker can have like these sort of areas and where they are ideological and their reasoning is highly motivated.
This is a dodge and a weave, like playing dodgeball. But remember Tristan Harris talking about the AI, like the sort of the rise of an general intelligence. Mm-hmm. And someone said, is it like the discovery of nuclear weapons or the nuclear weapon? Mm-hmm. And he goes, no, it's more like as impactful on the arc of human history as the invention of religion. Which I thought was a really interesting, because, if you kind of, we've talked ad nauseum about, like, for instance, like how people followers of Jesus could get to a point in like, northern Great Britain, and they were killing each other over whether the wine is blood or whether the cookie is the real flesh. Mm-hmm. And like the transubstantiation, like thousands and thousands of people.
Like, is it actually turning to Jesus's flesh once you consume it, or is it just symbolic? Yeah.
Right. So, but that particular point, which among two groups of Christians, was so divisive that they murdered each other, for thousands of them, and it seems like such an odd, like to me, like it seems like obviously a distortion of, like, the Spanish Inquisition, how close is it to Jesus's teachings? Like there was so, like you forgot about when Jesus wrote that book about the rack and torturing people with fire. Like, we found this old book where he actually is pro torture, like it just isn't, it's just so odd to me,
Yeah.
And anyway, it's an interesting point because like to look at, I do think that we have that same kind of tendency to become tribal and to fight over things that are very much like we're running around the elephant trying to kill each other when the main thing is the world is burning or we don't have, all these things. And that seems to be a persistent human trait rather than a variant, like an odd extreme variant,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, I don't know if it's like there are certain differences between individuals, like literally physiological, biological differences around how we process information, how we attend to the world, that drive like a certain number of people to be like that, and there's always a certain number that aren't just by nature like that. Because it seems like in every one of those sort of eras where there was some mass tendency toward something violent or whatever, tribal, there are always people that are like the dissenters, right? Like the voice of reason that gets drowned out. Like those people don't disappear. There is a voice of reason always. And you look at the lead up to, World War II and the things that people were seeing clearly. There were clear-eyed people, right? All the way, in throughout Europe and in Germany and in the U.S. And then there were people that were marching, that were either blind to stuff or whatever. So I just wonder, like, what is there a difference between those clear-eyed people, like a fundamental difference between being clear? Tristan Harris, who you just talked about, the guy he toured with for a while, Daniel Schmachtenberger.
Oh yeah,
he used to be on this podcast that I would listen to religiously called called Rebel Wisdom, and they would.
Oh yeah.
It started out with them kind of like trying to amplify like heterodox thinkers. And what's weird is a lot of the heterodox, quote unquote, heterodox people that they wanted to kind of like boost ended up being weird, crazy ideological people in their own way on different, like on COVID and stuff. Some of them went just weird. So they started talking about audience capture and stuff. And this phenomenon of people being motivated reasoning. And Daniel Schmachtenberger, like he has a lot of things on that podcast on what he calls sense making, which is just kind of the difference between being motivated by, being an ideological person that's motivated to believe certain things and then cherry picks and confirmation bias and blah, blah, blah. And how to not be that, right? Like how to be a discerning, in his word that he liked was sense making person. And he just kind of talks about how you just noticing that stuff in yourself. Like we all have areas, just recognizing that we all have areas where we are not willing to question certain things or where we close our ears to the other argument. And it is true. Like I can think of areas where if somebody says something to me about like chemtrails or whatever, like I will just roll my eyes and close my ears. There are things that I also won't, and I'm pretty confident that if I listen to somebody and they like rigorously walk through that conversation about chemtrails, like I wouldn't believe in chemtrails. So I kind of shortcut all that by going, oh, it's dumb, and I roll my eyes. Like I'm not even willing to have the conversation, even though I'm very confident that. Anyway, so it is interesting. I think that's true. Like if we all notice in ourselves the areas where we're not even willing to have a conversation, where we just sort of close our minds as a reflex. We all have them.
Yeah. It makes me think of RFK. Like if we do get rid of toxic food dyes, like or like preservatives that they've banned in Europe, but we just have them. Like that's like one positive thing that happens from. I don't know that it's worth people dying of measles. Like it just seems
it's like we got rid of red food dye, but we also killed all cancer research. So I don't know.
It's kind of
like does that even out?
Kids are dying of measles like that. I thought we were, MMR with like.
Yeah, but there's no more red dye in their Skittles.
So yay, they can.
Their Skittles are healthier now, a little bit. Not that much healthier because it's
The
still
sugar is
basically
still there,
sugar. But, like Fruit Loops are a little bit healthier than they were before.
It's true. Hey, I wanted to circle back because I feel like it's June, and I remember getting a subscription to Mid-Journey through, what is that dumb thing called? Discord. Like I had remember the AI that you could put in a
They
prompt.
couldn't have made Mid-Journey harder to use.
Oh my gosh, it's so nerdy. And Adobe had one that was
Like all these
such a
other
beautiful-
AIs, like you just have a field that you prompt, like Mid-Journey was like, we're going to use Discord and you have to, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, you have
That's
to
a little bit
code.
of a
You
rant.
literally
That's
had
a
to
good first world problem right there. Like, can we make this really, like this is pretty cool, but can we make it really hard to use?
Well, it's totally the Steve Jobs thing when he visited Xerox PARC and they had this like a box with like a number pad and like it was like a mini keyboard with like 3 dials and and he was like, it's gonna have one button and they're like, what? But why wouldn't, then you can't control all of the functions of the program. Like you need all that shit. Like, like it's an engineer. It's like, but why wouldn't you just use prompts? Like you just code them, like, colon.
I mean, I
AI.
get it as a minimum viable thing. Like, oh, we don't want to build like the prompt interface just yet. Like there are these interfaces. We could just use Discord for now.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I couldn't even figure out how to use it. I may be just old or something.
No, dude, no, it's really hard. Like I would keep snippets of code in a notebook page, and I'd have to go get them, paste them in, and modify them because it's just so clunky and awkward, Anyway, so my point was that 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago when this sort of big scare about AI sort of rapidly becoming generally intelligent and taking over everything and killing the humans, right? And I was like genuinely like nervous about it. I thought, so then I don't know if you saw, but like at the keynote, the Apple keynote, where they said we were going to release like an AI upgrade to Siri, but it failed all of these like quality control things. So like we're not going to release it. And then later they published a white paper like the end of last week, showing how all the quote unquote, Claude AI, all of these ones aren't actually doing reasoning. That their ability to reason fails after very early on, like you would think that they're basically taking a snapshot of what has happened in the world, and then they're using predictive modeling to just guess what will happen next. But if you actually force them to do reasoning, they just can't.
Yeah.
And that's like
I'd love to read that white paper.
Yeah, let's put that in the
show notes as well. Yeah,
down there. Subscribe up here. Down show notes. Anyway, we're at time, and I have an update on my first world problem.
Okay.
So remember we talked in previous episodes about how I have this toaster that I bought for $5.95 at Home Depot on sale. In like
60 years ago or something.
Yeah, it's probably 25 years old, right?
Yeah.
So, but and it immediately broke.
It's been handed down through
the
your
little
family.
thing that keeps it down and then senses that it's warm and pops up. That broke right away. So I just would put a chopstick in, and the little thumb thing, you'd hold the thing down, right? And then sometimes I burn my toast. I've probably burned it 20 times or something. My wife burns it a lot. You have to set a timer. Anyway, so just yesterday, the little plastic thumb thing that you push down snapped off inside. And so this morning I figured out I could put the chopstick in, push it down, twist it, but then I have to put a little jar of jelly under the end of the chopstick, and it works. Yeah. And I remember my wife was like, "No, it's brilliant." And I said, "I think." I use this analogy of like I was walking with my colleagues up in the desert.
I love all of this because a new toaster is like $12.
I know, but this one was $9.95.
But that's why there's mad respect, man, because of that. Yeah.
So here's my weave, my dodge on that. I said, so we're walking across the street from one building to another. It's in the desert. This is at my roast job, and a pile of us colleagues, and then this roadrunner runs across the path and doesn't break stride. Literally, like, is just cooking along, like going over the rocks. Like
I love those things.
Does not break stride, even for a split second. It picks up a lizard and keeps going. Like it just picks up a lizard that it must have known was there.
I used to love seeing roadrunners.
And I remember turning to my colleagues and saying, from our Darwinian perspective, it almost seems like if you're too good at something, there's no pressure to evolve. Like it's like he's stuck in this roadrunner thing because he's so fucking good. And so I was like,
it kicks that coyote's ass.
Totally.
Anyway.
So with the toaster, my wife was like, no, you're brilliant at problem solving. I'm like, maybe that's an issue. Like maybe if I was not good at it, I would get a new toaster. Like why? You know what I mean? Like it's sort of.
No, I mean you pick your battles, right? There are plenty of things that you could jerry rig in some way that you decide not to pick that particular battle. You just don't. I don't know.
I like
just
it.
Like,
it's a challenge. It's like
it's a challenge. It's just a toaster. Like it's not such a critical part of your life that you care that it works perfectly, right? Like there's a lot of reasons why you're willing to not pick this battle to fight.
Well, I think though that I'm not picking this.
Like if it was part of your cinematography, you might buy a solution. You might be like, this is stupid. Why am I jerry rigging this? Because you care enough.
Yep.
But you're just making toast. Like the cost of failure is not high. The inconvenience factor is not that high compared to, the value of,
At this point, I'm so far out on the limb that I kind of have to keep going.
Yeah, there's a sunk cost thing going on.
I have to keep going because
you have to
it's like a challenge. And if it sort of beats me, there will be a day where I no longer can use the toaster. Like it.
Right.
Like if it can't.
And that will be that will feel like a defeat at that point.
It will
because
feel like
you have been, this has been a long battle.
Yeah. And the truth is, really,
what would be a failure, an end failure that wouldn't feel like a personal defeat?
Okay,
like if the heating element just burned out one day.
Well, like in toast, you have
this toaster finally died. I can't solve that problem.
If you have two heating elements, imagine if this one burned out, and so like the toast was only cooking on one side, I would get rid of it. I'd be like, that's stupid. I'm not going to try.
Right, like you're like you would feel like I use this toaster until the end of its natural lifespan.
Yes.
I managed to sort of nurse it along until it reached its natural lifespan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true.
That makes sense.
It's true. It feels, but anyway, so I'm proud, but also a little bit afraid that I'm OCD about finding these. Like it looks funny because the chopstick is in there. It wants to tilt down, which lets the thing go up. But if you put a little jar underneath the end of the chopstick and then walk away, like it works perfectly. So that's my first world problem is that the thumb thing fell off.
Yeah,
it's a good update.
I'll give you mine. Like you always, I often have one in mind, but like I change when I hear yours because I have something similar. So my similar one is I have one of these Yakima bike racks that was pretty expensive, right? And I think I backed into a wall just very lightly. And when it was on the car, I was backing up and I tapped the wall. Well, so it has like the lever that you pull to like open it up and to tilt it and stuff. The lever, the handle is plastic.
Oh.
And it's anchored, like it's attached via two little plastic pieces. Like it's a plastic kind of big enough to grab it, but then the supports that actually attach it to the metal are these tiny little plastic arms, basically. And so those snapped.
Eesh.
Right? So I guess my first world problem is I can't stand it when you have an expensive product that has a really, really simple, vulnerable point of failure. And so this thing is $600 or whatever, and the most important piece of it is so weak and easy to break. And there's no real way to fix it. Like I tried to fix it with some glue and I made a new plastic support. And so I will work on something else. But I mean, I can pull the lever with some vice grips. I can grab the tiny little remaining piece of plastic that's there.
That's nasty. Yeah.
With some vice grips or pliers and operate it that way. But like the handle broke off, the little lever. So yeah, when there's just like a single point of failure that is incredibly weak. It's sort of like my bike rack's penis, right? Like it's like the way men are designed. We have these fairly resilient bodies with this fragile dangling thing that hangs off.
With all the nerve bundles that are in the testicles, vulnerable. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
That makes me think of so I came to Tucson in 1994, and I immediately took like a grad class in photography. I wanted to do like a master's in photography, and like an MFA. And they had the photo department had just bought a $250,000 color processor called the Hope processor. And it was like this size of like a small, like a Mini Cooper or something. It was pretty big, right? And you would feed you'd go into the darkroom and you'd expose your print, and then you'd come and feed it in to the processor, and it was like an kind of like they would have it at it's probably similar to what they have at Walgreens. Mm-hmm. It was like a machine that does all the different chemical processes.
Okay.
So I was using it, and I go in there, and I trained on it and learned how to use it, and then I was feeding it in, and it was like clunk, 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 and my print got stuck in it. So I went to the guy who was like the manager of the lab, photo lab, and he goes, he reached down, he kind of sighed and rolled his eyes, and then he reached down and into his desk, and he picked up a huge bag, like a giant, like 2-gallon bag of little plastic gears. Like little tiny gears with teeth, but they were plastic. And he goes, here you go, man. Basically, every so often the teeth just snap off, and you just have to replace them. And they gave us, when we bought it, a bag of like 300 gears. And I was like, so they knew.
Instead of making like a metal gear that won't break, they're like, when we ship this, we just also remember to send the bag of gears with it when you ship that out.
I asked
to
that
the
question.
customer.
I was like, why didn't they make them metal? And he goes, because then if they got jammed, then it would break the motor, and the motor's more expensive than the gear. So they'd rather have the failure point be cheap and easy to replace than something.
Well, that actually makes some sense, but
what a
seems
terrible
like there's
design.
a better way to solve that problem.
Yeah, like put a little clutch on the motor or some kind of
Yeah.
it just was so funny that like as you pointed out, like a very expensive thing with such a terrible failure point, and like they know it, so they give
it's
you
interesting,
a bag of gears.
like when you think there's definitely a story there, right? Like there's a whole, because they probably had motors fail, which cost thousands of dollars, and then they were like, it gets jammed and the motor fails. Like, how can we prevent it from getting jammed? And then some engineer was like, what if we didn't prevent it from getting jammed? What if we made the jam? Like, jamming is just part of the thing. We just accept jams. But what we'll do is we'll make the jam non-fatal to the motor. Right. And then somebody else was like, why don't we just stop it from jamming? We can't stop it from jamming. It's going to jam.
Yeah.
And there probably was like a really long debate between those two engineers.
And there might have been
probably a product person that was like, no, it can't. Let's stop it from jamming, dude.
Yeah, like the voice of customer, like
we can't stop it
feedback.
from jamming. We don't know how to stop it from jamming. Figure out how to stop it from jamming. We're never going to do that. All right. Well, okay. Here's what we'll do. We'll look into that. In the meantime, we'll do this thing with the plastic gear.
So I know we're going over, but that makes me think of, so when I was working up at Roche Tissue Diagnostics, we made instruments that process slides that have biopsies, and they're automated. So they need to move a piece of glass with a very important, valuable, like no one wants to go back to the patient and be like, in the lab, they broke the slide, and so I need to go back in and get more tumor tissue. Like no pathologist or doctor wants to say that to the patient, right? Mm-hmm. So, and you don't get that many pieces, so if you have 4, maybe 5 tries, right?
Yeah.
So we're looking at some kind of company meeting, and I'm brand new employee, and the guy's like, yeah, with our new primary staining instrument, we've, after launch, we reached an all-time high of out-of-box failures of only 23%. And I leaned over to my coworker and I was like, what, did he just say out-of-box failures? And that we're celebrating 23%?
23%.
23%, meaning that you delivered it to the customer.
Like you deliver it and right out of the box it is not working.
They plugged it in and it just
only
didn't
happens 23% of the time. Only
and they were
not even 1 out of 4. That's less than 1 out of 4.
I know, but they were, and I was like, well, what was it like before? And he goes, we don't talk about it. That product, when it was launched, like every single one of them, like we deliver them to labs in Brazil, and then they would plug it in and it would be like, it just didn't work.
Oh my God.
Anyway, pretty funny. So, great, man. Satellite Haiku, it's where it's at.
All right, brother.
And Satellite, great to talk to you.
Bye, friends.
Yep.
See ya.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Satellites? A satellite represents a journey, information gathering, this journey around the Earth.